Hello and welcome to Victory Points. I'm Becca Scott.
And I'm Jake Michels.
This is a podcast about people who love tabletop games, interviewing other people who love tabletop games about the tabletop games they love. Did you know that, Scott Rogers?
I did not know that, but I do love tabletop games, and I am a person who loves tabletop games, so therefore we will be loving and talking about tabletop games together.
Perfect. You nailed it. Okay, so you've heard him. Our guest is Scott Rogers, designer of tabletop games, video games, a co-host of Ludology, the podcast. He teaches game design at New York Film Academy, NYFA, they say in the biz. He's an alum Disney Imagineer. I don't know if you say alum, but...
Ex-Imagineer?
No, I think alum sounds cooler.
Alum sounds better.
Once Imagineer, always Imagineer.
It'd be nice to be Disney legend, but I didn't do anything significant enough to qualify for that. So.
Ex-Imagineer sounds pretty badass.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, I'll take Ex-Imagineer.
Ex-Imagineer. He literally wrote the book on video game design used in university level courses. There's Level Up, the guide to great video game design, and Swipe This, the guide to touchscreen game design. Yeah. And we met when I had the chance to play his 2017 tabletop game release of Rayguns and Rocketships by IDW.
That was fun.
Tell me more things that I left out because you have an immense resume.
I also teach at the University of Southern California in their interactive media department.
Heard of them.
Which is the #1 interactive media school in the whatever world, I guess. Country at least.
Universe, in fact.
Universe,
if you're going that
I think.
Far.
Well, we haven't done that cross-universe plan yet. Anyway, I've
the
also
satellite school.
Yeah, very good. No. I got that. Also, I have designed video games for many years, about 25 years, and a lot of them games that you may have heard of, like God of War or Pac-Man World or Darksiders or Warhammer 40K or Drawn to Life or lots of SpongeBob games or Maximo, which was one of my favorites to work on. And lots and lots of video games. And so I did that. But I have always loved tabletop games. I've been playing them since I was a little kid. And so I kind of feel like I've kind of rolled around full circle.
Awesome.
Oh, and I also made Pantone, the game that just came out 2018. Party game. You guys played it?
Yeah.
You guys know what Pantone is?
We played it.
I've come across it. Did we play it?
I feel like you and I did play it together.
Tell us more.
Yeah, please remind us.
So the Pantone color system is for but graphic artists who it's their way of essentially staying literally on the same page. So let's say Becca is in New York and she is making a lovely Victory Point logo and she wants to make sure her hair is just the right color of red. And
never is.
And I'm in California and I'm creating some beautiful artwork for her. And she looks in her Pantone book and says, I got to make sure my hair is orange, C3, well, I don't know the actual number.
C33225 is my hair color.
All right, there you go.
Found it.
Yeah.
So then I look in my book and I make sure that the paints or the dyes or the Photoshop or whatever is the same color. So then when I send it back to you, you go, that is perfect, and here's your money. So that's Pantone. They've been around since the 50s. But what's really cool about it is there are Pantone nerds, right? Just like everything else. Everybody is into it. And the game that I designed was originally called Who's Hue, and it's a party game where you are creating colorful characters out of colored cards and clever clues, and you are laying them out. So, for example, if I have a card and I put out some colored cards, and essentially I'm making maybe like Batman out of colored cards, and you look at it and you're going to guess, and if you don't know who it is right away, then I'm going to give you some clues, but the points go down the more guesses you have to take. So it's a bit like Taboo maybe, or one of those other party games.
Love it.
So it's essentially I call it Pictionary with pixels, and because my background in video games and I used to do pixel art and well whatever. Anyway, so when I was at Gen Con one year, I was pitching to Cryptozoic Entertainment, our friends over there, and they make lots of great games. And I was pitching all different other types of things, and they're like, "What else you got? What else you got?" And then I said, "Well, I have this one little game, but I don't think you guys be interested in it because you guys don't do this type of game." And they're like, "No, we want to see it." I'm like, "Nah, it's not. It's nothing."
Ooh,
it's
tease him. Yeah, tell him
no,
it's not for them.
I did.
No, you're being
I know.
We get it.
In retrospect, now I'm like, "Oh, what a
Ultimate
great strategy!"
salesman.
Yeah.
Right. But I was honestly hesitant to show them the game, and so finally I pull it out and we start playing it. And Corey Jones, who is one of the co-owners of Cryptozoic, he gets kind of this mad gleam in his eye, and he's like, ooh, I know exactly the license I want to put on this game. And I thought it was going to be like DC Comics or Cartoon Network.
They do a lot of Rick and Morty.
Yeah, Rick and Morty. They do all these great licenses. And I thought they were going to just say, oh, let's do Who's You, but like, Cartoon Network or whatever. And he goes, Pantone. And I go, but the good thing was I went to art school, so I knew what the heck Pantone was. So for like 2 seconds, I'm kind of scratching my head going, And then I went, yeah, I totally see it could work. Let's do it. And the thing that's amazing about it was we were at Gen Con last year with it and showing it off. And people were like coming out of the blue and, oh my God, I love Pantone and I've been using it for years and it's my favorite thing. And I'm so amazed that you guys made a game out of it. And so who knew? Yeah, well, Corey knew, but I didn't know. I was just making a fun little game for my family. So
Wow.
That's so cool that some of the best games can come from the most obscure of topics. It doesn't have to be an entire story. It can just be an idea or a thing that people know.
Right. And I'm honestly surprised that nobody had thought of it before I made that game. But yeah, it's very simple. It's very fast. It takes about like 15, 20 minutes to play. But it goes up to like 20 players. So you can.
That's
if you
what
have
the
like
box says.
Yeah, the box does say that. Yeah, and you can buy it at Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or wherever. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you like party games, if you like games about being creative, but you don't feel like you're a very creative person, it's still a good game for you.
Those games are super crucial because whenever we put somebody on the spot with a lot of these games that require creativity, they get such anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very great to have a game like this where it is just like throw your card down in a space and justify it.
Right.
Right? Yeah, that's wonderful.
Well, I mean, that a bit of that was intentional in design because I'm an artist and I'm pretty good at drawing. I'm no Jim Lee, but I'm pretty good. But I'm really good at playing Pictionary because I can communicate very fast, and I'm more of a cartoonist, so I draw very quickly and all that.
You're getting an idea across, not having to start with the shading first.
Yeah. There's no chiaroscuro when I play,
stick figures
Pictionary.
work
Yeah,
fast.
stick figures work well. But I was good at doing it, but I had lots of other friends and family that would get very angsty about creating these characters in Pictionary, and I noticed that like it kind of impacted the game, and I wanted to make a game that removed that uncomfortability out of the equation. And so
that feeling like you don't have the skill to play this game.
But
anybody can.
But anybody can lay down colored cards and move them around in a little configuration. And the great thing about the game is there aren't enough cards to make like replicas of characters. And you only get 4 of each color, and that's actually intentional because most people draw a human figure using 5 cards, 1 for the head, 2 for the arms, 2 for the legs. And I removed that. I wanted it to be I wanted people to be more creative than that. Well, more abstract, but also more creative. So at the initial stage of the game design literally was like I lay down a red card, a white card, and a blue card, and Becca, who is this? And then
that is Lady Liberty herself.
It could be Lady Liberty herself. It could be Captain America. It could be Wonder Woman, whatever, right? But then as the clues would come in, then I'd say, Invisible Jet, and you'd be like, oh, Wonder Woman or whatever, right? So part of the game was that association of the color with the character. And that's the reason why I chose all characters, is that a lot of they call closure skills, right? So when you can see, like if you see something out of the corner of your eye, or you're scanning the supermarket shelf and you know what the box cover of Captain Crunch is, and you're looking for that red and yellow and blue, that's Captain Crunch, or the shape of his hat or whatever, that's your closure skills working. And so we're able to very quickly identify things that we're familiar with, and a lot of it has to do with color. And so that was kind of the foundation of the game, was this idea of we associate color with characters, or we've been trained to through animation and comic books and movies and things like that. And so that's kind of where the idea started, that it's very easy to make that jump between some very abstract things to an idea about a character.
That's really interesting. That theory applies to games in sort of like the Dixit world or Mysterium, because I noticed that some people associate colors with one another and other people associate shapes or like a specific object, but you've limited it to just color so that the different methods of thinking don't put someone ahead or behind. Everybody's you're just thinking in color.
Right.
So it takes away that variability, which makes it more open to anybody.
It's almost like interpreting like iconography. Almost.
Oh yes, very much
really
so.
Instead of just art, it's like symbols and like how you create them.
Yeah, and even to the point where in the middle of the production, people would come and say, "Well, maybe we should make different shaped cards, right?"
No.
Well, yeah, I did.
Fish slam.
I did fish slam and go no, because the abstraction of the cards, A, is more flexible than you think. B, originally, at one point they suggested, let's just make them squares. And I said, well, with squares, it actually limits the amount of things you can do. And I don't know if you guys have seen pictures of the creations that people have made online, but they've made some pretty detailed and convincing imagery of these characters because they've had these unusual, longer, they
have a longer side. They've doubled their options in terms of length. Because a square, no matter how you rotate it, is still the same dimensions.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you can do fun little things with the corners peeking out and all
There's
that.
a good one on the Pantone website, I think, of Abraham Lincoln, which is a really solid example.
Yeah, we have a Facebook page, and I put up, usually when people send me their creations, I love to put them up and share them with the world.
So were they sitting on the Pantone IP just like, man, the expanded universe idea we had just isn't working. We need a game for Pantone.
Yeah, PCU.
The comics aren't selling either.
Exactly.
The MMO we designed is just dead.
No, the way I understand it from how Corey told me was that he had wanted to do a game with the Pantone license for a long time, but never at a game. And I showed up with the game.
Yeah.
And so it was just this serendipitous thing of his desire to do something with Pantone. I had the game that worked for that license, and it was a happy marriage.
That's awesome.
Oh, so satisfying for him to be the great connector of these ideas.
Well, he's a smart guy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. There's so many things I want to talk about, but one is something you've been looking into, which is position at the table. Now, I don't want to give away because I know you're working on things about this and you've been doing research. But just the idea in general is so interesting to me that I've never thought about that before, except perhaps in games where you can only trade with the people adjacent to you.
Right.
But
no, not forced positioning, but actual like where you sit and even a little bit who you're sitting next to is part of it as well. It came from an observation I was making, and part of it is because I'm getting older. My eyesight is not as good as it used to be, so now I have to have glasses to look at little things. And I was playing a game where a major component of the gameplay was at the far end of the table. It was a big sprawling game, and there were lots of really neat things going on. But this one component, which was pivotal to success in the game, was all the way at the far end of the table, and I was sitting at the other end. And it was like we were playing like a 4-player game. And I found that at the end of the game, I hadn't thought much about that thing, partially because I wasn't next to it. And so that got me thinking about... So then I played a few other games, and I started to notice, watching the other players, that as they were placing... Like worker placement, for example, like Lords of Waterdeep.
Yeah.
Where the player sits, they're more likely to play in the area that is immediate to them because A, they can read it, and B, it's within hand reach.
yes.
And so now I started, as I'm watching my friends playing these games, I'm starting to see little patterns. It's not consistent all the way across. This is why I need to still do more research. But I'm noticing trends. And once I start noticing some trends, I start formulating priorities. And I've already kind of known this, but I kind of recodified it for myself, which was the priority of things within reach of the player. So I've devised, I think it's a 5 or 6 tier system of priority for players that game designers should be thinking about, because it's based around the idea of what is forefront in their mind as they're thinking about playing the game. So the first thing is the thing you are holding in your hand, which in most cases is a hand of cards, right? Some cases maybe not, but mostly it is, right? Or tokens or tiles or something like that. So let's say I'm playing a game, I've got this hand of cards. So I'm thinking immediately about what do I have? What am I going to play? What am I going to play next, right? My second hand, this is the number 2 priority, is the hand that is manipulating things in the world. Now, ambidextrous, whatever, there's a lot of ways you can say, well, what about this, Scott? Well, all right, shut up.
Left-handers forever.
Exactly. So, but this is the hand that moves the mover, places the worker, rolls the dice, uses the pen to keep track of things, moves the points up the victory track, whatever, right? That's hand number 2. Now, sometimes those hands can change priority. And it's something that I've been playing with a little bit. So Rayguns and Rocketships actually does this.
Yeah.
Where you start off the game with cards that you program. So you have this hand of cards, and then you program in your cards, and then you set the rest of those cards aside, and now you pick up this other hand of cards, and this is the things that you're going to be using to help you manipulate your characters on the board, right? So what I've done is I've realized that essentially you can't have 2 hands of cards going at once, right? It's just too hard to juggle. Mm-hmm. So I'm giving you an opportunity to kind of set things down, go, okay, I'm done with these. Now I'm picking up these other ones, and now they become the new hand. So this is a technique game designers can do, right? We can alternate these kind of almost like mindset. Yeah, switching your mindset, right? I'm thinking about it in this context. All right, now these other cards do other things. Now I'm doing this other thing.
Right. Some games have phases, and each phase requires different parts of the brain.
Right, and that's how the game designers can help chunk these out, right? Like it's almost like a phone number where the phone numbers are divided up, 805.
Put those dashes makes all the difference.
Yeah, the dashes do, though, because humans have a tough time remembering anything past 7 digits. And so that's why those chunked up, because how many, if you're doing area code, that's 9 digits, our brains can't handle it, right? It's too much. Yeah, or whatever, to 11, or I forget how many it is. But the point is...
it's 10.
It's 10? All right, thank you. Becca doing some quick mental math. Anyway, so humans can't handle, that's too many. 10 is too many, so that's why they've chunked it up like that, right? And there's tons of research done about that. It helps, though, to be hanging around with guys like Jeff Engelstein and Gil Hova, because they're smart and they come up with this stuff, and then I kind of go, I'll talk about that too. I'll sound smart also. Anyway.
You bring your own flavor to it.
I do. I'm the comedy relief, I think. That's how I've been treating it. So the third layer is the thing in front of you, and that's the tableau. Right? So, for example, Scythe has that wonderful tableau with lots of little minis. And now that becomes, all right, I'm not doing something with the hands, or maybe I'm doing it in tangent, but I might put stuff down, and now I'm thinking about the tableau in front of me, because it's my dinner plate, right? All that yummy stuff is right there. It's not a fork, it's not a knife, it's my food, right? So there can be a lot more activity in here, because it doesn't need to be manipulated as often. So like in Scythe, you have which one of these am I going to take, and then I'm going to pick it up, and then I'm going to move it to position number 4, which is the shared board, usually the shared world, right? So this is the kind of the separation between me and everybody else, right? So now we've kind of passed this little threshold to now place our worker placement, move our guy.
Likely in a space within arm's reach.
Right, yeah. Now that's where it gets interesting, right? Because we are much more likely to go for targets that we can reach, because there are many games that often say you should stand while playing. So, for example, one of my favorite games is Formula D, which is that car racing game, right? You have those polyhedral dice, you roll them, they replicate the gears, and you drive your little car. But the tracks are big. The boards are massive. They fill up a whole dinner table. And you should not play that game sitting down. You should be standing up and moving around, because there's going to be points where your car is zipping around the curves, and so you should move yourself over to where it is and then count out the spaces and roll the dice and all that, right? So there are certain tables, Warhammers like that. A lot of miniatures games are like that. They're not meant to be just lock yourself in and play like D&D. They're meant to be get up, move around, and manipulate. So the board in the middle, a lot of game. But the problem is when you have a hand or a tableau, that's locking you into a place, right? So your focus. So you're like, well, it's a little weird to get up and move around, or I've got to kind of squeeze my way past.
You need a tray table that's attached to your chest.
Right, yeah. Nobody's invented that, although that's not a bad idea.
Trademark.
Yes, exactly.
Hold on, let me get on the trademark website.
Becca's
sponsored
copywriting
by Game
right now.
Table.
So that shared space, depending on the scale of it, then becomes very important about where am I placing. And like I said, I've been noticing this trend where people place usually closer to where they're at. So as a player, it's a good habit to try to break that, right?
Yeah.
Because now you want all those options and you don't want to limit yourself.
Are you comparing these people also by like their level of experience within the game?
Oh, I'm not even there yet. I haven't even, I literally made this observation like 5 months ago, and I've just been starting to.
I'm so curious how that relates to like new players who are learning all these new symbols and instructions on the game board, and they see something that's closer to them more frequently, right? So they become more familiar with the concept. Whereas you're right, if the corruption track or whatever's on the other side, they won't think about it as often.
I'm going to postulate a theory, and that is a new player might be more likely to get up and see what's on the far side of a board than an experienced one.
What?
Yeah.
That is counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive, but a new player is still trying to learn all the elements of the game.
True.
And
Whereas
so the more
an experienced player knows, put all your eggs in one strategy basket and go hard on that.
Well, and there might even be players. I do know some games that I've seen happen where players will be like, oh, I want to sit next to this because this is the thing that I'm going to be doing. Right, so there's certain games kind of promote that there's certain spots in the board that are dedicated to certain things, like Shadows over Camelot, right? Like have kind of those little areas designated. You know, here's where the jousting is, here's where the Black Knight thing is, here's whatever. And so maybe you might find somebody positioning themselves near something that they think is either strategically advantageous or maybe they just like it. Right. So that's so we're one hand, two hand, tableau, middle. So we're at 4. So let's go on to 5. 5 is any sideboards. So in Lords of Waterdeep, the Skulls of Skullport or whatever it's called.
That's 2 little add-on
that's
map
the
locations.
corruption board or those little boards that get added in. Or like in the case of the game that I was playing, this kind of sideboard that had this different tracking system going on. And that is where trouble kind of arises in my book, where it's very easy to not be paying attention to these things. And you could even, if you are kind of a sneaky player, you could even choose to
push that further away from the other players.
Yeah, so they maybe don't notice it as much or don't take advantage of it as much. So the goal as a game designer is to either come up with a clever way to move it around, to like make it accessible to the players. So, for example, I know
Lazy Susan the game.
Yeah, Lazy Susan or
I bet Corey's got their number on his list.
Or game tray, right? Like build a nice game tray that then you can, almost like an hors d'oeuvre tray, right? Where you can pass it around. So that way people can move it from a position 5 to a position 1 or 2 or 3.
Or between rounds, you have to rotate the location at different parts of the map.
Yeah, that's a good idea, right? Yeah, well, Tzolk'in does something like that, right? Where things kind of move around as you go, so you have to pay attention. Or there's some other games that have the kind of rotating stuff underneath the board. There's like a Doctor Who game that does that. Anyway, so then the last position, number 6, is the rulebook.
Well, you skipped 5.
No, 5 is the sideboard.
5 is the sideboard.
5
What
is
was 4?
4 is the middle
The
of
group tableau,
the group
the map.
table.
What was 3?
3 is
Tableau,
the
personal tableau.
What was 2?
Is
It was
your
the side
one
hand.
What was 1?
Is your primary hand.
Okay, good. Everybody's keeping track.
All right. Thank you for keeping me honest,
Yeah.
Jake.
We'll draw a
number
diagram.
6 is the rulebook. And the thing is that how often do you really want to dive into the rulebook when you're playing a game?
You never want to let other people see. You want to be the only one with access to the rulebook.
Well, that's part of it, right? Yeah. Well, there are people that bogart the rulebook.
No.
But there
Chaotic
are
evil.
other, but a rule book. So part of the thing, like, you know, many games have a guide on the back page, right? Because it's meant to be this shorthand for don't look in the book. Here's everything you kind of need to know. Once you dive into the rule book, that's where trouble starts. Because particularly if you don't have a great laid out rule book, it can cause problems. People often are looking around. I don't know where it is. And then the kind of the adjunct number 6, although maybe it counts as number 7, is then having to go online to look at what's going on, right? Because that's going to literally screech the game to a halt, right? Even the rule book will bring the game to a halt.
Number 7 is the forums of people.
Right.
Here's my house rule.
Gil is always talking about the magic circle, and I feel that 6 and 7 break the magic circle. If you have to leave the reality of the game and enter the world of the rules, that's where problems start to happen as a design. So whatever you can do, I mean, it's perfectly fine to have those there as resources, and it's great that they exist. But as a game designer, your goal is to try to prevent that from happening. And if it happens a lot, then there's some sort of problem because a lot of that information should either be in your 1 or 2 position on your Tableau or in the main board, right? And that's where you want
like
most
the little cards that have turn orders and stuff, which we are always blessed with whenever we get.
Love a good player guide. Yeah, I think for a new player, it gives them this sense of betrayal from a game. If someone else knew something else, and even if you said it's like, oh, well, I didn't know that scored points.
I always feel bad when that happens when we're scoring up final victory points. Like, oh, yeah, if you have 3 workers here, you also get these points. Well, if I'd known that.
Right.
Well, we said it real quick at the beginning.
I mean, but once again, also, when you're reading the rule book, particularly if you're kind of slogging your way through it, people tend to remember things near the end of the experience. So don't get me wrong. Whenever I tell my students when they're writing a rule book, I always say you need to start with what's the objective of the game because it puts everything in context.
Yes.
But I also feel that at the end of the rule book, you should also reiterate it and say, oh, by the way, just in case you've forgotten, this is partially because it's a little easier to find at the end of the book. So you just have to flip a page or 2 rather than kind of dig past all the fiction. And then it's good to have that reminder, right? So if I go into playing, any sort of game and go, all right, the ways that I can win are A, B, or C, I'm going to keep that in my head. And if I have that little reminder at the end, don't forget, the ways to win are A, B, or C, then I can go, right, all right, now I can move forward and start playing the game.
That's interesting that you said it should go last because I was thinking about that when you were talking about proximity of what's near you and thinking about the psychology of when you're giving someone choices.
Yeah.
I was doing a little online poll to see what movie I should watch with my housemates, and I obviously put the ones that I wanted best first, and then the one I wanted very, very most last because it's the last thing that sticks in your head. Yep. So how can you be fair?
You can't.
It's
impossible. You can't because we experience things chronologically. Like humans experience life chronologically. And everything.
So far.
Even if I put a sheet of paper in front of you and it has 4 things on it, the position of where on the paper they live is important. Like if you know anything about comic books, right? There's a certain way the eye moves around the page, right? And that's the same for text and all types of things like that. So we read things chronologically, and the order absolutely matters. And your strategy, of course, by putting the thing you want most near the end is pretty good. There's often the strategy, like when I used to work for Disney, when we would pitch ideas, often we'd put the best idea second because you'd look at the first one and you go, all right, that's not bad, but let's see what's next. Then you look at the next one, you go, ooh, that's really good. And then you look at the third one, you go, it's not as good as that second one.
That second one, yeah,
right.
And does the second one tend to build off of the first one, whereas the first one was like a baser version?
There's a lot of mind effing you can do to get people to do a little bit what you want.
And make them think you thought of a lot more ideas than you actually did.
Well, there's that too. That's the whole art of pitching, right? Where you give them the bare bones and then they fill in everything else for you. You're like, absolutely, it's going to have dogs with wings in it, and that's a great idea, of course. And you're like frantically writing all this stuff down.
Absolutely. What'd they say? How many wings did the dog have? 6? I prefer a dog with 6 wings. All right. Well, you know what? Whew. So intensely excited about these 6 elements that forgot to take a break.
Yeah, I should write this stuff down.
We're going to take a quick little break. You should maybe. Have you ever thought of writing a book?
Well, I've written 2, but they were about video games. So actually, I have.
Now, we have to take a quick little break, but when we come back, we have so much more to talk about with Scott Rogers. Hello, and welcome back to Victory Points. I'm here with Scott Rogers. I'm Becca Scott.
And I'm Jake Michels.
Oh, hey.
Hi.
And we're having such a fun time. It's almost like you lecture on gaming for a living.
I know a little bit about games.
You do, and you know how to talk about them.
I try my best.
All right, now I want to talk about some specific games because that's what we do here on Victory Points. We like to shout out games that people might be interested in or just what you've been playing lately. And there are 2 games that you mentioned that you have enjoyed playing lately that I think you know a thing or 2 about the awards they received as well. The first is Wingspan.
I did. I have played Wingspan. Only once, though, but I liked it a lot.
It's Stonemaier Games.
Yeah, Jamie Stonemaier is the publisher. The designer is Elizabeth Hargraves, and she just won the Kennerspiel which is a very, very
Kennerspiel.
yeah. Good job, Elizabeth. And it's her first game she designed.
That's pretty insane.
It's a little insane. As a game designer, I go,
And
her
speaking
first?
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
That's very cool. And speaking of taking a simple concept like Pantone colors, and this is a game about birds.
Yeah.
And about bird
Well,
identification.
originally, I'm trying to think if it was about something else first. I heard we just recently. So my co-hosts on Ludology, Gil and Emma, they spoke to her a couple of weeks ago and interviewed her about the game. And I kind of remember her saying that the game was themed to something else, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it was always birds.
Well, our listeners will have to go check out that episode.
Yeah, you should
of
go listen to
Ludology.
Ludology. It's good. And it's free, so yeah. Unless you want to Patreon us, and that's always good. But anyway, Elizabeth wanted to create a game about birds, but what's really lovely about the game, it has gorgeous art. It's a very clever design. But it's also educational in the way that I like things being educational, which is you don't realize it.
Right.
And as a result, Elizabeth has gotten a lot of great attention from organizations that normally have nothing to do with board games. For example, like birders societies.
Yeah.
The Audubon Society has said, "Oh my gosh, this game is 100% correct. All the information is correct, and all these lovely paintings of birds, and you're essentially doing things in the game that makes sense because of the way that the birds work in the real world." And I was reading some article on NPR, and they were super excited about this game. And that's one of
It's canon.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the really nice things about board games. One of the things I love the most about board games, which is they can really be about anything.
Yeah.
All right? They don't like video games. I think for a long time they weren't that way.
They're about shooting stuff.
Well,
primarily.
in the 90s they were about shooting stuff. But remember the arcade days, the old-timey ones?
Burger Time.
I knew you were going to say Burger Time, right? Yeah, Burger Time and Quicks and Q*bert and Paperboy. And
Paperboy,
I mean,
that's a good one.
you know, these were games that they weren't particularly violent. They were just about either weird little characters or strange little things or even mundane things, but taken from a kind of more whimsical point of view.
Yeah, like
right?
a job, like
Yeah,
Paperboy.
like back when paper was printed and thrown at your door every day.
right.
Dogs were loose all the time.
And
Dogs were
death
loose.
was stalking you at every
Oh
moment.
my gosh, that kid got ran
yeah.
over so many times.
Yeah, but I mean, the games, this is, I think, a bit of a misnomer that the poor game industry has had to deal with its entire time, is that, sure, there have been games that are violent, and there have been games that have been controversial almost since the start of gaming. In my history class, I teach about a game called Death Race, which is only tangentially related to a movie called Death Race 2000, and in it, you would drive your little car around and run over little people, and they turn into tombstones, and you'd bump into the tombstones if you weren't careful, and you could trap yourself. And then, of course, mothers saw this and said, "You are making little Jimmy learn how to kill people with cars." And the company Exidy that made it said, "Well, those aren't people; those are gremlins, and it's okay to run over a gremlin." And
everybody hates gremlins.
Exactly, nobody wants
Always stealing your socks.
Exactly. Nobody wants a gremlin to live. So at that point, the game industry just kind of poo-pooed everybody and went on with their business. But by the time we hit Mortal Kombat, we couldn't be ignored anymore, and so we get rating systems and whatnot. But that's fine. But the problem is that it gives the impression that every game is violent. Like if you went out into the street and said, "Hey, what do you think about video games?" They'd be like, "Oh, I hate that they're so violent." But then you say, "Well, what about Angry Birds, and what about Cut the Rope, and what about Pac-Man, and what about Portal?" And Portal's pretty violent actually if you think about it.
It has violent story, but like
it
the
does have a
gameplay
violent
is puzzles.
story. But the gameplay is But whatever. The point is that I used to go to like Target or GameStop or whatever, and I would look at the shelves and I would calculate, all right, how many of these games are violent, do violent acts, and how many of them are not. And to be honest, in my own personal research, which unfortunately I've never published, I found that things started to lighten up around like the late 2000s. Like a lot of it had to do with the resurgence of mobile gaming and Nintendo and the DS and things like that and the Wii, because people will follow trends, and if games are shooty and violent, then other developers will follow trends and just say, "Oh, well, that's obviously popular. I'll do that."
Well, you have to find that breakout game.
Yeah, but if not,
breaks up
then
the model.
yeah, if not, they'll follow the other direction. And I think that if we were to calculate up the number of games that had violence in it versus the games that don't, I would say my own guess is that it would be overwhelmingly in the direction of non-violent games.
Sure. And then the trend towards cooperative games.
Oh, yeah, right.
Where you're just killing monsters.
Well,
but what is the morality of monster killing?
Well, right. It depends on whose side you're on. Whose side are you on, Becca?
The monsters,
of
obviously.
Course. Yeah, well, they're pretty cool.
Cool. Final thoughts on Wingspan?
So, lovely game. Play it if you can. It's a little hard to find right now, but I'm sure they'll be doing another printing.
Yeah, I'm sure after winning the Kennerspiel.
Yeah, it'll be even harder.
Everywhere.
And that's the interesting thing about the Spiel is that it's, particularly overseas, it is a great way to get more sales. It literally causes a jump of about 10,000 units of sales, which is really good for the board game. But what I think it will do is it will get either a Walmart or a Target to carry it, and then that means more people will be exposed to it.
I've met several people who were not gamers who got into gaming because of Wingspan. Actually, yeah.
Got into gaming because of Wingspan?
Yes, they were invited to a board game night and they were tentative, but the
are
board
they
game
ornithologists?
They are not. They are just nerds, but not of the gaming variety. And they were invited to a board gaming night, and the first one that got pulled out was Wingspan, and they fell in love. And I was really surprised that was how they got in, but they did.
Yeah, which is nice because now you can Sherpa them towards other games, right?
Things, exactly.
Yeah, you can say, look, it's not, if you like this type of theme of, nature, you can look at photosynthesis, or you can look at Bossk, or you can look at...
photosynthesis is a beautiful game.
Yeah.
Well, like you're talking about with, like, not only just violence, but also just, like, design of games and what their themes are, the birds and the way actually the aesthetics of that game in particular, it's very welcoming. Mm-hmm. It's very easy, and it's not a big dude in a variety of armor with huge swords that you're like, okay, I don't know what this guy does versus this person.
Right.
There's friendly numbers and looking birds.
There's something for everybody. There's
Pretty
nothing wrong with a beefy guy with a broadsword and chainmail, but it's not for everybody. And once again, like I said, the great thing about board games is there's something for everybody. Mm-hmm. There literally is something for everybody. If you name a topic, I can find you a game that you'd be interested in. Charlatanism. Well, that's the Sheriff of Nottingham. So you take that. That's a game about bluffing past, or you could do Snake Oil, which is a game literally about being a charlatan, right? About trying to sell products to people that are ridiculous.
I was trying to feed you into the quacks.
Yeah, I actually wanted to hop in too.
Right, or the quack.
But that's even better. You led into it with two other ones as well.
Well, the irony about the Quacks of Quedlinburg, which is another one of my favorite games right now, is I don't view it as a game about charlatans. I think it's a game about witches making brew, and I think that they tweaked the theme just a little bit to push it away from witchiness.
It's definitely witches.
Yeah.
I looked at it and I said, "Oh, okay, we're witches."
You're putting spiders and ghost farts into a cauldron.
Well, that's essentially what the medical profession was hundreds of years ago, right?
Ghost farts. Maybe, yeah.
Now, I don't know if you mentioned this, but it was the 2018 Kennerspiel de Jahres was the Quacks of Quedlinburg.
Yeah, that's a very, very great game.
I think it has a very interesting. You're pulling these ingredients out of a bag. Mm-hmm. You each have your own individual bag. Do you want to get into a little bit of just how a basic turn works? Because it has an interesting system of the way that you score points.
Right. So it's a push your luck game and a bag builder, which means that push your luck means that you can keep taking moves until you essentially bust. So a bit like blackjack, right? Most people,
or my favorite, Farkle.
Oh, yes, Farkle. Yeah, Farkle is my wife's favorite game as well, although she calls it something else, and I'm blanking for the moment. But anyway.
It's one of those that was around long before it was ever published.
Right, yeah. Somebody just took essentially a folk game and then branded it, and voila, now they're making money off of something that somebody else came up with, which is unfortunately a bit of a trend in board gaming.
You can name a few, yeah.
Yeah, Monopoly, for example, is the most known example of that. But anyway, so it's a push your luck in the sense that you can keep making moves until you cannot. And usually it's some condition in the game that says, nope, you've busted, or you've hit a number, or something like that. There's another really great Anyway, there's a lot of great push-your-luck games, like Ink and Gold is a really good one as well. But and then the bag building means that you have a physical bag. Everybody has their own little cute bag, and in that go these tokens that are ingredients. And there are good ingredients and there are bad ingredients.
You're drafting these ingredients?
Well, you start out with kind of a set number of ingredients, and then as you go, as you put the ingredients in your pot, they kind of swirl around in this concentric circle, and depending on the distance you get on the circle, determines the number of points you have to spend on during.
How long
buy
it's been
phase.
like simmering?
Kind of, yeah.
That's cool.
And so if I get a pretty good spiral going, I can get, like 20, 30 points, and then I can use those to buy more ingredients. And certain things synergize. So, for example, when certain things are pulled, I might be able to pull more. Or if I place something after something else, my points might escalate for that turn. So as you go, you are kind of trying to get the longest swirl in your pot possible. But there's some very clever catch-up mechanics in the game as well, which is there's a little rat that you can throw into your pot to kind of, I don't know, give it a little protein or something. And the
delicious.
rat is a catch-up mechanism that allows you to kind of bump out the tail of your swirl. So, for example, if Becca is kicking butt, she might not get the rat, but if I'm behind her, I can put my rat like 1 or 2 spots from the starting position, so now I have a little bit of a handicap, and so it's based on points. So as you gain more points, the further you are behind in the victory track, the more rat you get to kind of move your tail up. So that gives me the potential to get more points. So that way I can kind of catch up and buy ingredients to help me. Then
your bag. Your bag is essentially it's a deck builder by another name.
It's absolutely a deck builder.
Cool. That's interesting. I like that.
But it has the visual mechanics of seeing the spiral of ingredients in your pot is very satisfying.
Oh, yeah.
This is one I've watched a lot of playthroughs on. Haven't had the chance to myself.
It's got great table
love
presence.
That mechanic. Yeah, it really does. And
Very colorful.
Yeah, brings a different take on the deck building genre.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Wolfgang Warsch's game, and that guy is on fire. He did The Mind, which also won the Spiel des Jahres.
Now, that's an improv class game that has been... See, that falls in the category for me, but I do love The Mind.
Yeah,
I mean, adding the cards to it does change it slightly.
Yeah, I think I like The Mind a little better than the game. The game, I think, was the first one, and The Mind was the second one.
Oh, I didn't know that. I was
Never
referring
heard
to
of the
something.
game.
So, The Mind reminds me a lot of an improv game in which everyone closes their eyes, stands in a circle, and has to count to 20. But if anyone says the same number,
They're executed.
then everyone has to start over. It's not
Gotcha.
elimination.
Yeah.
It's all cooperative.
Yeah, once again, taking these kind of almost like folk games in a way, right? I mean, I know there's a million improv games. I've not taken a class myself, but I've looked at the types of things that are kind of common to the improv community, and yeah, there's so many great games that I think mechanically there's things that could very easily translate into board games.
Although The Mind is a little more interpretive, it does have a different strategic element, whereas the other one is just sort of feeling out.
Well,
no,
that's part
psychically.
of the. But I mean,
That is
that's
part of
still
it,
part
yeah.
of
That
the
is
mind,
part of
right?
it, yeah.
Like you have that where you're like,
Are we going? Who's going? You going?
I
Am I
have a
going?
5. Does she have the
It's
6?
actually
Does she
a
have
whole different level of it because of that physical
Right.
nature of it. Whereas usually closing your eyes gives you no visual information, but you're looking around the circle of the table and like, who's got 98 while I have 99?
Actually, yeah, we should explain the goal, which is very simple. It's a deck of cards numbered 1 to 100, and in round 1 everyone's given a small amount of cards, and all you need to do is have the person with the lowest card in their hand, or thinks they have the lowest card, place that down first, and then in sequence stack them without going out of numerical order.
Right, and you get like 3 lives or something like that.
Yeah.
If you
Together, everyone
right,
shares
together.
those
Yeah,
lives.
it's a shared
Yeah.
cooperative game. And then the sequel, which is The Mind. The original was the game, right? And then the sequel is The Mind. And then The Mind gives you like
Was it Ninja Stars?
yeah, talk about ludonarrative dissonance. You have like ninja stars for some reason that help you, like if you screw up, it helps save you from when you accidentally, hey, Becca puts out a 32 and then I go to put out a 51 and it's like Jake's like, no, I had a 45, and so we can ninja star that move,
prevent one loss, right?
Prevent a loss. So I think it has a little bit more choice in it, which I like in games. I'd much rather have some choice than feel like you're being a little railroaded by the game.
You don't think personified bunnies would throw ninja stars?
Well, maybe.
I think
I've seen Ninja Turtles.
Totally
They do.
cohesive.
Yeah, for sure.
Rabbits, or what is it? The Ubisoft games? Rabbits, Rabbids,
I
Raving
believe
Rabbids. You guys don't know that video
No.
game? The Raving Rabbids?
I know Jazz Jackrabbit, but that's
All
old
right,
school.
Well, all right, that's pretty old school. Anyway, there's a lot of rabbits out there. They're multiplying.
Oh my goodness. Well,
I want to ask a follow-up question
Please.
about positions at the table, actually.
Go
I want to go
ahead.
back because I
This is
never
gonna-
really.
I need a good name for this theory now.
That's fine. We can keep it as is for now. Well, as a placeholder.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Positions at the
it
table.
started with with the idea of what I called handiness, which was how you interacted with things in your hand. There's different ways that like for example, there are the people that play Uno that always have to have them in the right order, right? And otherwise, it just freaks them out. They're like, oh, I just gotta get them in the or by color or whatever, right? And so I noticed that there was always a lot of business going on in people's hands. And then I started thinking about, well, how can I gamify that? Like, how can I take the idea of, like, I have this idea of this card game. I need to build it. But essentially, the idea is that you have maybe a hand of like 4 or 5 hexagonal cards. And on each of the corners of the hexagon, there's a statistic or some sort of like a command almost. And the characters, they're meant to be like your little party in D&D. And when something like when a player plays something, it affects one of the cards, and then you have to rotate that card, and then depending on what face is showing, it has like a cascade effect. So if it's like let's say like somebody hits somebody and you get like a little POW symbol. If that POW symbol is next to another character, it's going to move that other card so many spots, but then that's going to cause something else to happen.
But all within your hand.
But all within your hand.
And you're just giving us your mechanics ideas in this
Well,
podcast.
So here's
listeners.
Here's the thing. Mechanics
That will
cannot
come
be
for you.
copyrighted. However, the execution of them is what's important, right?
Yeah.
Writing the rules, making the art, things like that. So I can throw out a million ideas to everybody. Matter of fact, that's what we do on Ludology. We give people tons of ideas of mechanics and mechanisms that they can use to make their own games. But really the rubber hits the road when you make it. That's what matters and that's what I tell everybody when they say, well, what should I do about making games? I just say, make it. Just make the game.
Truth.
Right?
Yeah,
so
the
of course I'm
teacher-
not following my own advice. I need to make this game. But yeah, for those of you out there that are like, I want to be a game designer, well, musicians play music, artists make art, game designers make games.
Yeah.
Go make a game.
Yeah, Garrett, you hear this? You hear that
Garrett,
advice?
go make a game.
Do
man.
it. Okay.
I want to play
Garrett's
it.
not listening.
You know, I know, but I'm going to make him listen to this. We're going to get this timestamp. I'm looking at the clock now. Okay, great.
Starved wire. Deep cut that no one but
No one, that's only
me,
the
Jake,
crew.
and our former DP for Game the Game will get. We hid starved wire, we call it. It's kind of like barbed wire made of stars in as many episodes of How to Play as possible.
Hundreds.
So go back and find the starved wire. Anyway,
a
that's the
game
name of
within a
the
game.
the game company that we thought of before we thought of any games. I was going to say it's beautiful that you just love to give ideas and inspire. That's a thing that's come about with teaching, or have you always been that way?
So in 2008, I'd been going to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, which is a big video game conference for mostly creators. And I was sitting in actually it was 2007, and I was sitting in going to all these different lectures, and I turned to a friend of mine and I'm like, I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of this conference anymore. I feel like I've heard it all. And I didn't like that. And I didn't like that my company was sending me up to go as a representative, and I felt like I was kind of wasting their money. And I didn't want I wanted to keep going, and I'm like, I got to do something to kind of step up my game. Otherwise, I don't feel like I can kind of, in my heart, justify me going to this thing anymore. And so I said, all right, well, let me submit a talk. And so I submitted a talk about boss fights because I had made a lot of video games with boss fights in it. It's something I was kind of known for. And I essentially was called like how to make the world's greatest boss fight and why not to do it. And I gave this talk and it went over very.
Why not to do it?
Why not to do it? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I gave the talk and it was very well received. They have a system within the organization that they have these deck of playing cards, and if you are a top-rated player or speaker, you get your face on one of the playing cards.
Ooh.
So that next year, I got my face on the deck of playing cards, and so I was like, "Wow, that was really fun," and it was well received and
rewarding to have your face immortalized.
Well, that helped. I mean, I'm not in it for the playing card, but it didn't hurt. But I thought about like, well, what do I want to do next? Like, what do I do for an encore? And I ended up giving a talk about level design in Disneyland, and it's kind of one of the things I'm most known for, which is a talk called "Everything I Learned About Level Design I Learned from Disneyland." And you can find it online, and it's in the GDC archives, and there's a couple other places that have it. But that talk, it's fair to say that from a professional career, that talk changed my life because it got me a book deal, my first book deal. It got me my job at Imagineering. It's kind of the book is what I'm well known for, I think, maybe more than anything else. But the talk also was a kind of the heart of the book. A fellow from Wiley Press, a guy named Chris Webb, who I'm eternally thankful for, he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, could you write a book kind of about this talk?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I don't know if that's going to go very far." And he's like, "Well, let's instead write a book about your ideas about video game design." And so that's where Level Up came from. And
had you ever thought about writing a book before?
I had, because at that point I was working for a publisher, THQ, and I would go around the world and go to all these developers. And they were making really cool stuff, but I found myself kind of saying the same thing over and over again. And I would kind of mock threaten them and go, one day I'm just going to write a book, hand you the book, and go, all right, read this, and then we can talk. And because all the things
repeating everyone else. Yeah,
I don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. Just read the book. So I started thinking about, well, if I did write a book about game design, what would I write about? And so I had an outline of kind of all the topics I would talk about. At the same time, I was working with a group called Fifth Cell, and they were doing a game called Drawn to Life. And it's a DS game where you draw your characters in. It's a very, very clever game. They're the guys that went on to do Scribblenauts. And the creative director there, a guy named Jeremiah, he said, "Hey, Scott, you've made a lot of platform games. Can you tell me everything you know about platform games?" And I go, "No, but I will write down kind of the basics." And I found that over the years, in order for me to effectively communicate, I tend to draw it as a cartoon because that's just kind of how I'm wired. And so I drew something called the Platform Primer, which you can find on my blog spot, which is Mr. Boss Design, Mr. Boss Design. And it's essentially like, it almost looks like a coloring book, really, of how to do platform gameplay design. As a matter of fact, I just recommended it not too long ago because everybody's been doing Mario Maker 2.
Right. And that's such a cool tool as well.
I love that. Those games are amazing. But all the things that, if you want to do like the basics of a platform game, which is the Mario games, if you look at my Platform Primer, you're going to pick up a lot of good rules of thumb for making it. And it's about like 20 pages long, but it's got all these drawings. And so when Chris from Wiley said, "Well, what are you thinking this book be like?" I had the outline in one hand, I had the Platform Primer in the other, and the Disneyland talk, and I said, it's kind of a mix of these three things. That's kind of what the book should be. And he was like, "Great, let's do it. Let's make this
Let's
book.
publish this thing."
Yeah.
I'm looking at your Platform Primer, and it is charming. This mix of text and imagery is my favorite way to learn.
Yeah. Well, that's. I mean, nobody wants to read a huge, massive, just wall of text, right? I've learned that you can make a game design document that is that,
especially when learning,
right? But nobody's going to want to read it,
yeah.
Even if it's about cool things like fighting monsters and getting treasure and things like that. People still are very adverse to reading these huge things of text, and I found that they will look at it if there are funny little pictures involved. And so if you look at the Platform Primer and then you look at pages of Level Up, It's very similar. Like there's a lot of illustrations. There's like about 400 illustrations.
Did
in
you
Level
do
Up.
all those
Oh
illustrations?
I drew them all
Wow.
myself. And so it gets people excited and helps them it helps to have like little visual memory. Like you can tag a drawing with a concept and you can kind of go, oh yeah, I remember that funny little drawing. It reminds me of this thing that I should remember about game design. Plus, both Level Up editions, because there's 2 editions of the book, they have the best chili recipe you will find in a game design book.
Oh, sold.
And if you buy both the first and second edition, totally different chili recipes.
My mom begs to differ.
Well, you'll just have to try them out, won't you?
I guess so. There's only one way to find out.
Chili cook-off.
All right, one final question for you. What do you get out of designing video games that is different from what you get out of designing tabletop games? And how'd that crossover happen?
Well, so the video games, I love making video games. But if the power goes out, you just have a very lovely coaster. Actually, you don't even get the coaster anymore,
Nope.
right? It's all digital download. Curse you, Steam. Anyway, I love toys. I am a toy collector. To this day I still go to Target and look for action figures. I love physical things. And even though I love making video games are really just kind of this virtual stand-in for toys. And so my first published board game, Rayguns and Rocketships, is all about, it's got little miniatures, spaceships, and aliens and characters, and you move them around, and you're literally playing with these toys in this game environment. The game. Some people have accused me of just only wanting to make the toys. That they're like, well, the game is just in support of the toys. But anyway,
it's a fun game. I played it.
Oh, that's good. I thank you. It was fun to play with you. Anyway, I love the toyetic nature of tabletop game design. I love the physicality of it, and so that is extremely satisfying to me. And so I'm always looking at games from that perspective. I'm always like, how can you manipulate them first? How can you make them? And I would really love to make, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm quite minded this way, but I love, like, people always poo-poo them and say, ironically, they poo-poo the games like Don't Wake Daddy or Don't Step in the Dog Poo, and some of those games are horrible, right? Like they're barely a game. Yeah. But I love the fact that they create like this, like they're making a very epic stance about, like, here's this plastic bed with this plastic dad that as you're kind of working her around, all of a sudden this thing kind of launches up, right? Or there's a game my kids had called Captain Bones Gold, and it had like this mechanical skeleton in the middle, and you're kind of moving your little pirates around this island that's all made out of gorgeous molded plastic. It's kind of like Fireball Island, but less involved, right? And then at a certain point, you press the top of this plastic monkey's head, and this treasure chest in the middle of the board like shakes and rattles, and then if you get bad timing, the lid like pops off, and the skeleton like launches himself across the board, and you have all the little movers have these little coins on them that have magnets in it. And so the skeleton will reach out and like grab the coin off of your little guy brilliant. And retreat back into his chest.
Ooh, yeah, Hungry Hippo style.
And just from a toy perspective, you're like, all right, there's not a lot of game here, but the stuff that's going on is epic, right? It's so
well.
Fun.
That's just like what was it? Operation was a cool game like that, and Perfection.
There's the Dex games, but it's not just dexterity. It's the incorporation of how can I have toys and then build a game around them?
Right. Yeah. Pretty much. And so that's a lot of my motive. A lot of the designs that I'm working on, I'm always thinking about it from that perspective of like
the tactile nature.
Yeah, how can I make some sort of tower or some sort of little landscape, or like, because a lot of tabletop games, I mean, they can get very abstract, but a lot of them are also these, like, it's like the same kind of thing that when you see like a train set or something, right? Like it's this miniature world, and there's something very charming about a miniature world.
Yeah.
And I like creating worlds. I love, like, I've been lucky to help create a lot of nice little franchises and video games, and so I want to keep doing that. When I made Rayguns and Rocketships, that's my version of Star Wars. That's my little world that I've created, and and I get a lot of pleasure of just seeing all those little pieces laid out, and it's like, oh look, you can kind of tell what's going to happen because the world kind of informs that.
It's the collector in you that gets satisfied.
Toy collector. I've never quite outgrown that. So.
Hey, and you don't have to. It is celebrated in this weird world we live in.
The nerds have won. We won the culture war. Woo-hoo. It was a long, hard fight. I was there for all of it, but.
Yeah, now we have to burn everything down.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Civilization. All right. Well, Scott, it's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah.
Oh, I do have one final question, which is a question I've asked to other guests. It's what is a personality quality that can help someone to become a better gamer to game with? What makes someone fun to game with?
Right. So, a willingness to try new things, that of course, right? But I think I don't know if I'm misinterpreting your question, but
No, it's to be interpreted as you see fit.
being patient, right? Because everybody's in a hurry to like play the game, and you have to be gentle enough and slow enough to make sure that they get it and present it in a fun way, right? Like make a fun event out of it. There are certain games that lend themselves more. I mean, theme is a big part of it, right? So if I were to play Wingspan, maybe we would, turn on a little ambiance of the forest, with the birds tweeting in the background. Maybe we'd break out a nice little drink, and you guys could have your white wine and I'll have my, my whatever.
Avian themed, like a honeydew nectar.
Maybe make a little bowl nest of pretzel sticks or something, right? Or whatever. Make it fun, make it an event, right? But really, kind of being a good host to your players, because you don't want to scare them off. Gaming is there's a lot of hurdles to get over for gaming, and the more you can remove those hurdles, the more likely you're able to bring people in, and then they'll realize this was fun. This was not painful. It was not too bad.
The anxiety's down.
The anxiety is down.
Add to it.
Hey, I've played a game. I'll play another one. Let's try something else.
Yeah.
Right.
Excellent. Well, let's shout out Ludology. Where can they find your podcast?
Ludology. Just look up Ludology podcast on Google. I think it's at like Libsyn or something like that. I always forget the address. Sorry,
Wherever
guys.
you get your podcast.
Wherever you get your podcast. Yes. So Ludology podcast. I do. Like I said, I'm the co-host, so I show up every so many weeks. But then I also do a segment called Biography of a Board Game, and that's a little bit more regular. That's every 4th or 5th week. And then if you want to reach out to me online, you can go to Mr. Boss Design on Blogspot. You can find me all over Facebook. I'm all over Twitter. I think I'm Mighty Bedbug on Twitter. And then I have fan pages for both Rayguns and Pantone. So if you are into those games, and if you are into those games, a Amazon review or a nice review on BoardGameGeek.com always helps the creator. So even if it's not me, if there's somebody else, if you want to give Elizabeth Hargraves a good review of Wingspan, I'm sure she'd appreciate it on BoardGameGeek.com. Us designers need as much support and love as possible, so don't be afraid to help us out.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure that I give my reviews on both of those platforms now that I know. I'd love to help out. And make sure that if people do play Pantone, that they post their photos of their creations on Pantone, the game fan page on Facebook. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming in. Scott Rogers, such a pleasure to have you here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And in the vein of rating, subscribing, getting your friends to go look at something, please do that for victory points. We want all your friends to find out about us. So make sure you do all those things, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye.